Israel pounds Iran for a second day. Iran responds with more missiles and drones. As calls for restraint are ignored, the Foreign Minister joins me this morning for Australia's response. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Israel says it had no choice but to launch preemptive strikes on Friday to stop Iran developing a nuclear bomb. Overnight, those strikes have expanded to oil and gas facilities. Iran says this is a grave mistake. Its response, firing missiles and drones back at Israel, has so far been less successful. But few expect this will be the end of it. Iran's main stockpile of nuclear material remains untouched. Will it accept a humiliating defeat and come back to the negotiating table with the United States? Or will it double down and accelerate efforts to produce a nuclear weapon? We'll hear from Penny Wong shortly at this dangerous moment in the Middle East.
Breaking news out of the Middle East right now.
Israel has carried out strikes on Iran's nuclear program.
This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei vowed a harsh punishment in retaliation for the attack.
Breaking news from the Middle East as Iran launches retaliatory strikes against Israel.
Just heard a very large boom. The buildings were shaking. We're hearing multiple interceptions in the skies above and sirens. So this is the promised retribution.
Israel advised us this action was necessary for its self-defense.
Israel committed these barbaric attacks with a full intelligence, operational and political backing of the United States government.
Let me be crystal clear. No government should target American citizens, American bases, or other American infrastructure in the region. The consequences for Iran would be dire.
Australia is alarmed by the escalation between Israel and Iran.
This is a moment of grave peril in the Middle East, and we are urging restraint and de-escalation.
The Secretary General asks both sides to show maximum restraint.
More is on the way. The regime doesn't know what hit them. They don't know what will hit them.
This risks further destabilising a region that is already volatile.
The Prime Minister is pushing ahead with his trip to Canada for the G7 summit.
With the Middle East now on the brink of all-out war.
It's still unclear if he'll be meeting with President Donald Trump during this trip.
After the Trump administration launched a review into AUKUS.
We are very confident, though, that AUKUS is in the interests of all three of our nations and that it will play an important role in peace, security and stability around the world at a time when that is absolutely necessary. Thank you. Thank you.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong in just a moment. First, here are the latest developments. Israel and Iran have continued trading missile and drone strikes overnight. Israel's widened its targets to oil and gas facilities in Iran. Several buildings have been destroyed in Israel, and the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has issued this warning.
We will hit every site and every target of the Ayatollah's regime, and what they have felt so far is nothing compared with what they will be handed in the coming days.
Just two other things to mention. In the United States, a member of the Minnesota state legislature and her husband have been killed, and a fellow politician's been wounded in what the state's governor is calling an act of targeted political violence. Democrat Melissa Hortman had served in the state House of Representatives for 20 years. The suspect is still on the run. President Trump condemned the violence.
Absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. And they're looking for that particular man right now.
And Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has secured a meeting with Donald Trump. It will take place on Tuesday on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Canada. The Prime Minister says he will raise tariffs and the importance of the AUKUS deal. Let's start with the latest in the Middle East right now. Our correspondent Eric Tlozek is with us from Jerusalem. Eric, thanks for your time. You started the day in Tel Aviv, you're now in Jerusalem. Tell us a bit about the latest wave of Iranian strikes on Israel. What's that involved?
David, we saw them passing over to the north, and there's been a number of impacts. Not all of that wave was able to be intercepted by Israeli air defences. There's a town in the Galilee region where a house has collapsed, and the current reports is that there's at least 3 people have died in that house. And there's further impacts reported around the city of Haifa. Unclear exactly where and what the damage is, but the Iranian military has said it was targeting energy infrastructure and also factories which manufacture jet components. Now, it's difficult to get clear information about the impacts in Israel because attacks on critical infrastructure and military sites are censored. They're subject to restrictions. But this wave of missiles was reportedly a bit smaller than some of the previous waves, apparently around 40 ballistic missiles. But it looks like from the footage and the reports we've received that some did manage to get through, and they have caused some damage.
And Eric, tell us about Israel's latest strikes and its latest language directed at Iran.
So there's heavy explosions have been observed in Tehran, David, and also at other places around Iran. Israel earlier in the day said it destroyed a significant missile base and has been taking out missile launches around Iran, trying to weaken its capability to respond. And as you mentioned, the attacks have brought into energy infrastructure and particularly targeting domestic fuel facilities, trying a clear move that's trying to put pressure on the government in Iran. And the rhetoric of the Israeli government has also changed, is now openly calling for regime change inside Iran, threatening to target senior political figures, and Israeli officials been quoted saying that the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is not necessarily off the list of targets. So with Benjamin Netanyahu promising that Israel's offensive, now that he says the skies are clear for the Israeli Air Force, could expand further. There are political figures in Israel calling for Iranians to rise up and topple the regime. So it looks like that while the nuclear program may have been the justification for the beginning of this assault, Israel's goals in continuing it could be far greater.
Eric Tlozek, thank you and stay safe. We're going to stick with the situation there in the Middle East and also get some thoughts on that meeting that's now been confirmed between the Prime Minister and President Trump. Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister, joins us now. Minister, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
So just give us the latest information, if you can, on Australians, both civilians but also Australian government and military personnel in the region. Are they safe or are they being evacuated?
Look, obviously this is a very perilous situation. It's a very risky situation. I'm just getting an echo here, so I really appreciate if we could deal with that.
We'll try and fix that up just while I talk here. We'll address that.
What I was just going to say is my thoughts are with Australians and their families who are in Israel and Iran, and for people who have relatives in those countries. Our advice has been to shelter in place, to take hard shelter, to make sure you keep in touch with Smart Traveller, be aware of what the warnings and messages are on Smart Traveller, and to follow the advice of local authorities. Currently, David, the airspace is closed, so obviously that informs the advice that we are giving. What I would say is we've stood up the crisis centre. We have a consular emergency line, which is 24 hours. And I have been in contact not only with the ambassador, but we've stood up a team across government to deal with this response. OK.
Look, there's been a mixed reaction from different countries to Israel's decision to make this preemptive strike on Iran on Friday. We've heard, as I say, from some European leaders, a call for de-escalation, but an acknowledgement that Israel has a right to defend itself. China's been more critical of what Israel has done here. What's the Australian government's view? Was this justified and was it legal?
Well, let's step through what we know. The world knows that Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program is a threat to international peace and security. And we know that Iran has been found by the UN watchdog to be in breach of its non-proliferation obligations. This is why we all have sanctions against Iran, because we understand the risk to international security. What I would say is the key issue is not, is there a threat? There is. We all know that. It's whether or not, in response to it, we increase the risk of regional escalation. And that would have dire consequences to the people of the region. So that is why Australia has said, we urge de-escalation, we urge restraint, we urge dialogue and diplomacy, and that call has been reflected by like-mindeds and partners. You saw the United Kingdom and others have said the same. And I note also President Trump has said, he's open to a deal. We are concerned, as is the whole world, about the risk of this escalating and bringing more consequences for the people of the region.
But just to pick up on what you've said there, Minister, this acknowledging that there was a threat posed by Iran, but there's a risk of escalation in what Israel has decided to do here. Are you critical of this decision from Israel?
We would say what we have to do now is to de-escalate and exercise restraint, and we have to return to dialogue. I'd note that's what Prime Minister Starmer has said. It's also consistent with what President Trump has said. I think anyone looking at this understands the consequences of this escalating, of regional escalation, so that is more countries potentially being affected. That is a risk to all the peoples of the region.
But does Australia think what Israel has done was justified and legal?
Well, Israel has a right to self-defence. It does have a right to self-defence, but the question here is, not a legal proposition. The question here is, what do we do now? We know Iran is a threat. We know that its nuclear program poses a threat to international peace and obviously to Israel. What do we do about it, and how do we respond in a way that lessens the risk of more civilians, particularly in the region, being brought into this conflict?
We just heard the comments from Prime Minister Netanyahu. We've seen Iran continuing its response as well. There is no sign yet of de-escalation. How concerned are you about where this might go?
Of course, obviously, it's a perilous time in the Middle East. It is a risky time, obviously, we've engaged closely with the Israeli government through our ambassador in Tel Aviv and through the ambassador here and at officials level. I also spoke, after liaising with partners, to the Iranian Foreign Minister. And this is precisely the same message I put to him, that we urge restraint, because whatever people's views about what has occurred to date, what happens tomorrow matters to all peoples in the region.
So you spoke to the Iranian Foreign Minister in the last 24 hours?
48 hours. Sorry, with the time zones, yes. That's Friday night my time, yes.
And so you directly urged the Iranian Foreign Minister to stop retaliation?
I directly urge, as I said, after liaising with partners, I directly put to the Iranian Foreign Minister, we are saying to you, exercise restraint, return to diplomacy and dialogue, because continuing to escalate this has consequences for all peoples of the region. And I think that is a position that so many countries in the world are putting to not only the Iranians, but also to the Israelis.
Look, can I also turn to the Israel-Gaza conflict? There was meant to be a special UN conference happening this week on a two-state solution. That's now been postponed, given what's unfolding between Israel and Iran. But I'd still like your view on this, or your latest view on this. We've seen the US ambassador to Israel say that he doesn't think a two-state solution is still the goal of the United States. Does that change your thinking at all on this?
I often think of what Golda Meir, the former Prime Minister of Israel, said to Bob Hawke. And she said, there can be no peace for Israel until there is an honourable settlement of the aspirations of the Palestinian peoples. No peace for Israel until there's an honourable settlement for the aspirations of the Palestinian people. And that is where the international community, who are working to try and build a pathway to two states, that is where that thinking is from. That we understand this is not about symbolism. It's not about taking sides. It's actually about trying to build a pathway to peace. Because ultimately, stability and peace for Israel, security for Israel, as well as for the Palestinian people will not come until there is movement and the establishment of two states. Now, getting there is hard, David. I don't pretend. You know, we're so far from that right now. But that is why the international community is trying to work together to build this pathway. So I understand why President Macron cancelled the conference, and you know there is a lot more work to be done in the time ahead. But the point that so many of the countries of the world are making is that we know we want long-term peace and security for Israelis and for Palestinians, and this is the only path that enables that.
Australia, during the week, also sanctioned two far-right members of the Netanyahu ministry. This is against the wishes of the United States as well. Is there a risk that in doing this, Australia is less influential with both Israel and the United States on things like a two-state solution?
We didn't take this decision lightly, and we didn't take this decision alone. We took this decision with other countries, with the United Kingdom, with Canada, with New Zealand and Norway. We thought deeply about it and why we felt we needed to do it. We moved with others because when we act with others, we have more impact, and we are making a clear statement about extremist settler violence and the extremist settler enterprise not being, and the way in which that's been implemented is not consistent with human rights. It's not consistent with two states, and you know we feel that we need to act in relation to Gaza more broadly. As you know, we have taken a different position to that of the United States and Israel. We have called for a ceasefire, the release of hostages. We've called for aid to be delivered unimpeded. Now, these are all principal positions that Australia takes, and we do it with other countries.
Let me ask you about the Prime Minister's meeting with President Trump that'll take place on Tuesday in Canada at the sidelines of the G7. What should we and what do you expect to come from that meeting?
The Prime Minister has, as you say, indicated overnight that we have a meeting scheduled. We anticipate the opportunity to engage with President Trump. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world at the moment, but we're pleased that this has been scheduled. Obviously, the Prime Minister has said already that AUKUS and tariffs are things that are on his mind and are on the country's mind. So I'd anticipate that he will find the opportunity in the meeting to raise these issues.
We know the Pentagon has launched a review into AUKUS. The Prime Minister will raise this with the President, obviously. We know the US, the Trump administration, wants Australia to significantly step up defence spending. Is Australia willing to offer the US anything more to keep AUKUS alive?
Well, there's two things here. Firstly, in relation to AUKUS, it is a partnership that benefits all three countries. It certainly does benefit Australia in terms of submarine capability, our industrial base and jobs. But it also benefits the United States. It benefits the United States through our investment, that is $2 billion, provided to the United States for their industrial base to expand their capacity. It also provides Australian capacity so that the US has to do less maintenance in the near term, so they can build more submarines and we can continue to maintain submarines, giving them more submarine water time, more time in the water. So my point is there are near-term and medium-term benefits to the United States as well, and I'm sure the Prime Minister will be putting that if he has the opportunity to President Trump. What I'd also say in terms of defence spending, we have engaged in the largest increase in peacetime of Australia's defence spending in history. Now, we will always do what is required to keep Australia safe, as the Prime Minister has made very clear. We do that by assessing the capability that is required and ensuring that we acquire it. That's what we're doing.
Okay, but is the deal that's there at the moment, and that spending that you talk to, is that a take it or leave it? Or again, are you willing to do more? Are you willing to offer the US any more?
Well, I'm not doing... I'm not setting defence budgets as the Foreign Minister on Insiders. I mean, the Prime Minister's made our position on this very clear. We assess capability requirements and we make sure that they are funded appropriately.
How reliant is Australia on this AUKUS deal? What would happen if this fell over?
Look, it is a very important partnership for all countries. Certainly it's important for Australia. You know, we have a submarine capability which needs to be replaced. But there are benefits, as I said, to all countries, all three countries, including near-term benefits for the United States. And I'm sure that the review that people have been discussing will demonstrate that to the Trump administration and to others.
Just on defence spending, I mean, the Prime Minister, we know, does not like setting a GDP target, he tells us. He'd rather choose the capability we need and fund it. Others, however, are setting these targets. The British, 3% of GDP, the Germans, 5% of GDP, the French, more than 3% of GDP. It is seen by some as an important way of signalling to allies and adversaries your commitment on defence. Why does the Australian government take a different view?
Because we will fund what is required. I mean, I think the Prime Minister has made it clear the way in which we will go about funding defence. We will do it by assessing capability and ensuring that we provide for the capability that is required.
Okay, let me talk to you about China, because we saw the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth a couple of weeks ago at that Shangri-La dialogue and make some pretty strong remarks about China's what he called imminent threat to Taiwan. This clearly underpins the American sense of urgency here as to why it wants allies like Australia to do more. Does China, in your view, pose an imminent threat to Taiwan?
Well, first, in relation to Taiwan, the long-standing Australian government position remains, and I will restate it because it is important, that we support the status quo. We oppose any unilateral state changes to the status quo, and we urge these matters to be dealt with peacefully. The second point I would make is this. China has, as I have said, been exerting its interests and its power. It has been exerting its influence, exerting its power in order to progress its interests in our region. That is very clear. I've spoken about that for many years. At times those interests will be different to Australia's, and we understand that, which is why we do many things. We engage bilaterally, but we also engage with partners, including the United States, because what Australia wants is a region where no country dominates and no country is dominated. And that requires strategic balance, it requires the engagement of the US, and it requires all countries of the region to play their part.
I mean, you're saying China's exerting influence. The US does seem to be saying a whole lot more than that. I mean, Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, says China is seeking to become a hegemonic power that seeks to dominate and control too many parts of Asia. I mean, this is important. Does Australia have a fundamentally different view to the United States about the nature of the threat posed by China?
Well, I think it is clear that China is seeking to become much stronger in our region. I think I've said that many times, David. I've spoken about China as a great power, using its influence, using its strength, including its increasing military capability, to press its interests and to expand its influence. We know that is happening, which is why we have to respond in the way that we have, because what we want is not escalation. We want a strategic balance in the region, excuse me, which enables all countries to maintain their sovereignty and not have one country dominant.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong, we'll let you get a glass of water, and we appreciate you sticking with some technical issues there as well.
No worries.
Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good to be with you.
All right, we're going to continue we'll come back to the conversation about what's unfolding in the Middle East and bring in our panel. We're joined this week by Greg Sheridan, Waleed and Katina. Very good morning to all of you. Look, we're still learning, I suppose, how Israel pulled off this attack in Iran on Friday. We're hearing about drones being smuggled in and positioned there in advance. Obviously, a lot of infiltration of the Iranian regime by Israelis as well. All of that's fascinating. But Greg, I guess the big question, why did it strike now and was it justified?
Well, David, let me not hide in the shadows here. I think the strike was justified, and that really is implicit in what Penny Wong was saying.
You think so?
Well, she's saying Iran's nuclear program poses a threat. It's in breach of its treaty obligations. We have sanctions on Iran for this reason. Now, the threat to us is pretty indirect and distant. Iran, at its top leadership level, has said it plans to wipe Israel off the map. It sponsors proxies which engage in conventional warfare and murderous terrorism of Israelis, and indeed it tries to kill Jews all over the world, in Argentina, in Europe, and so on. Now, several things, I think, dictated the timing. One is that the Iranians had recently become much more aggressive in hiding their program. They had increased their enrichment activities, so they have a large stockpile of uranium enriched to 60%, which is just below weapons grade and far above anything you need for civilian purposes. They had announced that they were going to open a new enrichment facility in a secret location. Then on top of that, Iran twice last year sent hundreds of missiles and drones at Israel, and in response, Israel took out Iran's air defence. So there's a certain opportunity. It takes a long time to rebuild air defences. And then Iran had gone past the 60-day deadline of doing a deal with Trump. Iran has been negotiating this stuff for years.
And I want to come back to the negotiations with the US. But so there's a few factors there. The IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, had just found that Iran had not been compliant with its obligations. And obviously the opportunities, Waleed, I suppose, of Iran's proxies in the region being so weakened by Israel over the last couple of years too.
And that finding, by the way, from the Atomic Energy Agency is not, it's not a trifling thing. They haven't found that for 20 years.
Yeah.
So that's a very significant moment.
Do we know what that means? What actually they were doing that was not compliant? Or was it just hiding, not being
Yeah,
transparent?
I suspect it wasn't. It was the lack of transparency. Yeah. And we do know the US intelligence has been saying that actually they've developed a level of uranium enrichment that is unprecedented for anyone who doesn't have weapons capability, right? So that's all there. At the same time, the Trump administration's own director of intelligence has said they don't have a bomb, and the Supreme Leader has not restarted the program to build one. Now, I don't know how you hold all those things in tension. The word I think that Greg used, that is the key word, is opportunity. This looks to me for all the world like an opportunistic attack, in the sense that all the factors lined up for Israel to say, well, we can do this now. The Netanyahu government's wanted to do this for a long time. They've never really been allowed to. I think they know that Donald Trump, whatever he says and whatever his bravado, is ultimately not going to stop them. He's not going to do anything about it, even though I find it very hard to believe that the US was on board with this.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because this is a fascinating element. There were talks underway between the US and Iran. They were meant to have another round of talks today in Oman, but this strike has happened. Now, Donald Trump says he was aware of it. Do you think he was?
Well, they were clearly aware of it at the last moment, because they started pulling out the diplomats from the region.
From Baghdad, yeah.
They don't seem to have been aware of the nature of the attack, because some of the communication between the embassies is such that they didn't know whether we're pulling out just everyone but essential staff. What are we pulling out here? Which means they clearly weren't fully informed. The only version of it that says that this was all a grandmaster play is that Donald Trump was negotiating with the Iranians but didn't have his heart in it, and it was just running interference for Israel while this was happening. Now, I'm sure there'll be people in Trump world who want to spin it that way, but that is A, very difficult to believe, and B, pretty dangerous position for America to take, because what it effectively is going to say to the world is, well, you can't believe us. Whenever we're in a negotiation with us,
you still might get bombed.
This could be absolutely.
Well, let me show you what Donald Trump has posted on social media after the event. And this post does seem to suggest that he had something to do with the timing. He said that 2 months ago, I gave Iran a 60-day ultimatum to make a deal. They should have done it. Today is day 61. I told them what to do, but they just couldn't get there. Now they have perhaps a second chance.
Yeah, but if that's true, why was the negotiation today? That's still past 60 days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Katina, the Foreign Minister we heard earlier, did acknowledge that Israel has that right to defend itself, but did also, I suppose, warn about the risk of escalation in the region as well. So there's a level of concern there, isn't there, from Australia?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think anyone wants to see escalation in the region. So, you know, they're right to be concerned. I think it was, I mean, it does feel like maybe a little bit of retroactive justification from Donald Trump, the 60-day thing. I think his nature is he doesn't like war, he doesn't want war. And so
Certainly doesn't want to get the Americans engaged.
He doesn't want to get the Americans into wars, and you can see them fairly easily being dragged into this probably. So I think he was doing those negotiations in good faith or, you know, intending to make a deal in some sort.
Yeah, what do you think, Greg, about the American involvement or awareness here?
Well, I'm sure they knew, David. I'd agree with Waleed. I don't think they were in on it in the sense that Trump hates military action of any kind. You know, that's the acronym, TACO, Trump always chickens out. So he threatens military action. So people who demonise Trump ought to bear in mind the fact that he hates using US forces. I've been following this story for many, many decades, and I interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu in 2012 at a time when he wasn't talking to the American press, made international headlines because he was threatening a strike back then. But look, there was a definitive article about this in the Middle East Forum about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I wrote a column about it in The Australian, laying out what the attack would be. Now, if the Americans didn't know, they were the only people in the whole world who didn't know. Now, Israel crawls with American intelligence, and the Israelis wouldn't do this without... Now, the disappointment for the Israelis is they always hoped the Americans would do it with them, because America has a much more powerful air force, bunker-busting bombs and all that to attack the nuclear facility at Fordo. So Trump wouldn't do that. But on the other hand, since then, he has helped them intercept missiles and so on.
Sure, but when this now comes to what happens from here, the language of Netanyahu suggests that he wants to keep going, finish the job. We know there's nuclear stockpiles underground that they can't reach. I think that's right with their own weapons, but the US, Moab's mother of all bombs, can.
Sorry, David, when you say finish the job, though, what's the job?
Well, the job, if it's to wipe out any nuclear capacity at all.
Or is it to wipe out the regime?
Or is it to wipe out the regime? But whatever the job, you know, both of these are things that the Israelis are talking about. If Netanyahu wants to persist with that, where does Trump stand? Is that clear?
Now, I think Trump will be quite permissive. So he doesn't want American troops involved, and we don't know what the capacity of the Israelis are to strike those mountains, and it's possible the Americans could give them the bombs and they could do it. They seem to have suppressed Iran's air defence. They also seem to have a very effective cyber attack going because Iran is not coordinating things the way you would expect it to if its computers were working. But I think it's very unclear what happens next. But I think Israel's overwhelming objective is to do as much damage as it possibly can to Iran's nuclear program. Now, of course, it would like the Iranian people to rise up, and so would the Iranian people. I mean, we've reported wave after wave of Iranian demonstrations and Iranians being killed by the regime. But
so
I think that's unrealistic.
What happens in Iran now? The choices, none of the options are great here, Waleed, are they? Do they go on their knees humiliated by this attack and say, OK, we'll do a deal and won't make any nuclear weapons and let inspectors back in? Or do they double down and try to develop a weapon if they can? And what is the fate of the regime there?
So you're right, there are no good options for Iran. There are some very bad options for everyone. And that's why I think this is one of the riskiest things that you could do, I think, if you're in Israel's position, because the doomsday play is that Iran says, all right, we know we can't, there's no point negotiating with America. You've gone and killed our lead negotiator, by the way, so you can't expect the negotiator to deal when you're killing the people who are meant to be doing the negotiation.
Who's going to step into that job?
Right. So that's off the table. There's absolutely no point reaching a deal, right? Because even if we did, and if Israel wanted to attack, well, you've shown that you can't stop them and you're not prepared to. So that's dead. You're now talking regime change. How do we protect ourselves against regime change? Well, we've got two problems. One is a security problem in the region, as in we're being attacked. The other is our people hate us. Having a nuclear bomb would actually be a really good way of solving all of those problems at once.
So the motivation's there. Right,
and so they pull out of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, they go warp speed towards developing a bomb, and then you tell me what happens after that. That's before you even get to let's just presume they failed at that. And there was a regime change sort of situation. Well, we've seen how that goes. It doesn't go smoothly. It doesn't go well. We don't know what the new regime would be. And we also don't know what a regime that's fighting for its survival, that is prepared to do all sorts of things. I mean, we can all accept that, right? We don't know what they would do on the way out and the level of destruction. And you're also dealing with nuclear material here. It's terrifying.
Just before we leave the region, of course, this came just days after Australia joined the UK, Canada, New Zealand and Norway in sanctioning two of Benjamin Netanyahu's ministers, the two far-right ministers who have said some pretty extreme things about settlements in the West Bank and also the operation in Gaza. Katina, why did Australia join in on this?
Look, I think it was collective action. It sounded like we've been working with the UK for several months towards this outcome. And then, I mean, we had 4 of the Five Eyes. America obviously pretty upset that we did these sanctions. I think they made it clear that the speech that the UK's Minister for the Middle East gave to Parliament explaining it was quite strong, saying that these two Israeli ministers, you know, that their sort of rhetoric and language was in fact impeding progress towards any kind of peace deal, any kind of resolution of the conflict, and wasn't necessarily supported by a majority of Israelis. I thought it was actually quite interesting, the language that Penny Wong used when she was announcing these sanctions during the week. She was really quite carefully talking about the Netanyahu government rather than the Israeli government, that she made that reference multiple times. It's a slight shift in language from the government. She was really kind of saying that the problem is with the sort of the coalition of the government in Israel and the way that some of its ministers are acting rather than the whole country or the whole people.
Clearly, Greg, on these sanctions, this is not something Australia would have done alone, but in conjunction with those other members of the Five Eyes, all bar the United States. What did you make of this decision?
Well, David, if I can beg an indulgence, I do want to agree with Waleed about the danger of the doomsday scenario, and this is a very, very dangerous situation. But I'd also point out that Israel knocked out an Iraqi reactor in 1981 and a Syrian reactor in 2007, was widely condemned for doing so internationally, but thank God it did. So neither of those countries has nuclear. And there's danger whatever you do in the Middle East. On the sanctions, look, honestly, I think they are hollow and foolish. These are disgraceful Israeli ministers. Every Israeli I know is ashamed of them. They are reprehensible figures. They are a disgrace to Israel. Countries produce bad politicians. However, I think this sanction stuff is purely domestic politics. These are centre-left governments who have to manage a green left constituency and also, you know, Muslim immigrants and so forth. They are meaningless sanctions, and the Magnitsky sanctions were designed for members of authoritarian governments where there was no democratic accountability and no legal system. It's quite wrong to apply them, in my view, to Israel, although having said that, these are very horrible guys.
Yeah, I mean, look, technically the legislation that Australia has to impose these sanctions do give the minister the power to apply them if they're satisfied the person or entity is engaged in or been responsible or complicit in an act that constitutes a serious violation of a person's right to life, right not to be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment.
So do we apply these sanctions to every member of the Chinese government because of what's going on in Xinjiang? I mean, this is pure political management. It's got nothing to do with the Middle East. This is about managing Australian politics.
Let's turn to AUKUS. The meeting will go ahead between the Prime Minister and the President on Tuesday. Waleed, a relief for Anthony Albanese, I'm sure that it's locked in because Trump was starting to lock in some other meetings while he's there in Canada. Should we expect, I mean, Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese have talked about trade and AUKUS being on the list of topics. Do you think he'll walk out of that meeting with much to show, or will it be more a get-to-know-you chat?
Yeah, I think he walks out of the meeting with the ability to say he had the meeting. That's probably the main thing. You know, I think sometimes in Australia we presume that we have all kinds of heft that we can throw around and just get things done. Oh, we can turn around the tariff situation. And then we saw, of course, what happened on Liberation Day. No one's turning around that situation. So, no, I think it's important that he meets Donald Trump and that he has the conversation, but that's more to a long range sort of managing of the relationship, if indeed it's a relationship that can be managed. The AUKUS stuff is much more intricate, and actually the review that's happening in the US now it's unclear, but doesn't seem to be the initiative of the White House. So talking to Donald Trump may actually not be as relevant there as we might think. It's more of an initiative of the Undersecretary.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I mean, you have the meeting and you hope that you make some headway.
Well, the Undersecretary you're talking about is Elbridge Colby. He's the Donald Trump's hand-picked man for the Pentagon, and he has been a sceptic of AUKUS on these grounds that he's expressed a few times.
If we can produce the attack submarines in sufficient number and sufficient speed, then great. But if we can't, that becomes a very difficult problem because we don't want our servicemen and women to be in a weaker position and more vulnerable. This is getting back to restoring our defense industrial capacity so that we don't have to face these awful choices, but rather can be in a position where we can produce not only for ourselves, but for our allies.
So he's long been worried, Katina, about the US capacity to produce enough subs for their own needs, and are we really going to be in a place to hand over sell any to Australia when we're going to need them more than ever in the next 10 or 15 years? But alongside that, you've got these very open calls from the Trump administration for Australia to do a lot more on defence spending.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, the perception of Elbridge Colby is he's not necessarily a, hard and fast ideologue. I think he's thoughtful and he could be persuaded by the data if we've got data to back up our argument. I think it was interesting, Penny Wong just earlier referred to, that part of what we're offering them is less submarine maintenance that has to be done in the US in the near term. I think that's...
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so that's an argument that sort of bubbled up publicly in the last couple of weeks, but it has kind of been a key part of this AUKUS thing, is that they're having to overhaul the Henderson Defence Precinct in WA, and they've always said it will have at least one dry dock. The suggestion talked again this week is that it could have two. The plans, sort of indicative plans that were released last week when they put out the tender to do the design work for the whole thing, showed 4 maintenance docks for submarines.
4 maintenance docks.
So they're not all of the dry dock level. One of them's a floating dock, a couple of the sort of in-between ones, but they basically 4, you could be doing maintenance on 4 boats at once there, it seems to be the suggestion. This would effectively give the US a 5th place where it can do maintenance on its submarines. So, that's giving them a huge boost to the capacity.
Means more subs can stay in the water.
More subs can stay in the water. They can stay in the water. They can have their maintenance done here on the west coast of Australia, which is in the Indian Ocean, so it's in the region where the submarines need to be anyway, rather than going back to Hawaii or back to the US. So I think that is a very
There's room for
argument.
movement there on the...
The problem is that we do actually need to get that built fast. On the current timelines, it's sort of there's a bit of language about, we don't need it until 2032, but actually we really do need it sooner, when we'll have the US and UK subs rotating through from 2027.
Greg, this is a 30-day Pentagon review of AUKUS. How concerned should Australia be about it, and what do you think the Pentagon ultimately wants out of this review?
Well, I think it is designed to give Trump greater leverage with Albanese, and Trump normally from an international meeting, he wants a goodie. He wants a bauble. He wants something to say, look at me, I'm brilliant. I got this out of the Aussies, whether it's...
Or a plane.
Or a plane,
If we got
a spare plane. But look, seriously about AUKUS, I'd say it's such a fantastic deal for the Americans. We're going to give them $5 billion and there's no guarantee we get a sub at the end of it. This is very much like nothing changes in Australia. 100 years ago, we took out public subscriptions to donate money to the Royal Navy in the hope that they would defend us, because there's no way we could defend ourselves. My concern is there's nothing in this that increases our own capability. AUKUS has become an excuse for governments to do nothing. Everything Penny Wong was saying about increased defence expenditure is utter baloney. Given inflation, every area of government expenditure is at a historic record, and some of the government's announced increases don't occur until the first year of its 3rd term. And Albanese himself promised a GDP target when he was first elected. He said, I'll always spend more than 2% of GDP. He was happy to have a GDP target then. Yeah. But the Americans are concerned that we are doing nothing. So we don't have swarming drones like they have in Ukraine. We don't have demining ships. We don't have missile defences. We're utterly naked apart from the Americans.
So just on that, the government's keen to point out that they, just in the past week, have been doing tests on the Ghost Bat drone, including armed tests. That they're soon to announce, I understand, a drone shield in terms of drone protection. You're saying they're not doing
So
Anything?
the Ghost Bat is not a drone. Nothing the government tells you about defence is ever true. When people talk about drones, they mean the sort of swarming technology that the Ukrainians use, hundreds or thousands of cheap, independent aerial things which carry bombs. Which
we need that in Australia for our purposes?
No, of course we do, because it's essential to modern combat, and it's going to be. I mean, the Houthis have given the Americans the greatest naval battle since World War II, and all they have is drones launched from the shore. So, and it's a wonderfully asymmetric weapon. So if we're taking on a bigger power, say, for example, China, it's a terrific asymmetric, but we have none of that. And this is purely because of a budget and lack of imagination in our defence. Now, what they call drones are just companion aircraft. So the Ghost Bat is as expensive as a modern plane. We're only going to have a handful of them. You don't swarm them, and until a minute ago they weren't going to be armed. They were going to be purely surveillance. Now, we have nothing like the drone capabilities which the Americans and the British will have as the central order of their battle.
Coming back to the submarine question, Malcolm Turnbull has, shall we say, not been a fan of AUKUS from the get-go. And look, he made an interesting comment I just want to show you on 7:30 the other night about, well, maybe we end up with none and the Americans do the submarining. Have a look.
We should be investing in alternatives. We could do the base, do the maintenance, leave the submarining to the Americans and invest in other military capabilities that give us the ability to defend ourselves over a long range.
Just keen for some thoughts on this, because there's been criticism that the US would still have influence over how these Virginia-class subs would be used by Australia, but that idea that we have none and they just do the submarining in this neck of the woods, Greg, that's not an ideal outcome for Australia.
No, it's a disastrous outcome, but it's probably what we're going to get. So this was an idea in the Congressional Research Office research paper on AUKUS, which said, look, it is so illogical for the US to give Virginias to Australia at a time when it will be dead short of Virginias. The Australian Navy won't be able to operate them properly, and it's not committed to the fight if there is a fight against China anyway. So they said maybe, and this is a reflection on how many years we've wasted. I mean, it was the 2009 defence paper under Kevin Rudd, which said we must, as a matter of urgency, acquire 12 regionally superior conventional subs. And if we'd gone with Tony Abbott's Japanese subs, we'd nearly have the first one by now. But they're saying you do more maintenance and everything, the sort of thing Katina was outlining. But what that is, that's our old imperial defence. We get the Americans to defend us on our behalf, and we contribute to the American effort. We have nothing of our own, except that we might get some long-range missiles.
And look, there'd be a domestic implication of that sort of, as Greg says, disastrous outcome too, right? Because there's a lot of jobs and investment tied up in subs here, building subs here.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, it's been a feature of our defence relationship with America that we are have a very strong stance about our sovereignty, and we still keep, you know, we know we don't, but the government knows more or less what's going on in Pine Gap. You know, the Marines rotating through Darwin, even though they are, for all intents and purposes, based there, technically they're only rotating through, just coming for a short stay. You know, so I think that there has been a really strong attitude from Australia that we need to keep some sovereignty over the capabilities, and if we didn't actually have our own submarines, we wouldn't have that.
There are sovereignty implications even if AUKUS goes well, right? This is part of the problem. And I mean, there's all these arguments you hear about giving up our sovereignty in a technical sense because we would have to be relying on American contributions to maintain and all that. So there's that. But one of the criticisms that's come out of the United States, and it goes back even to the Biden administration, of this deal is, well, should we be selling submarines to Australia without them giving a commitment that they'll get involved in a war in Iran? Now, we haven't given that commitment, but if that ends up, maybe that's what comes out of the review. Oh, well, you have to commit. Now, so what we're doing there is we're giving up our own foreign policy.
Correct.
Well ahead of time in order to secure a deal that, as lots of people have heard, including Greg just now, may not deliver anything. That's a sovereignty trade-off. Like, I don't know that there's any version of this really where we escape the kind of imperial thinking of defence where someone else will come to our aid, and we might be actually being forced ahead of time to make a decision on where we stand on a conflict between our biggest trade partner and our oldest ally, rather than getting to the point of it and then making a decision that might be in the national interest. Any way you go here, this is not absolute sovereignty for Australia.
So, David, what Waleed says is absolutely true, 100% right, but I'd make two quick points about it. First of all, we won't give an advance commitment. We just won't. So that's why that's why Elbridge Colby says, well, I'm not going to give you a bloody sub and take one out of the American order of battle.
If we don't know how you're going to use it. Yeah.
We won't give that commitment. But second of all, if the Americans go to war, we'll be there too. Because the first thing the Chinese do will be to strike Pine Gap and various American facilities in Australia. That'll happen on day one before we are formally notified that there is a war.
I'm thinking more of a conflict with Taiwan rather than in the region.
In effect, if the US and China are at war, we'll be at war on the side of the US. And also, our trade with China will stop that day because we can't be selling iron ore to a country which is killing Americans in battle. So, but at the same time, Waleed is absolutely right. It would be against our sovereignty to say we'll just go to war whenever you like, so to speak.
And that's partly what the leverage is about here, right? Like, all the stuff about AUKUS, fine, that's 2032. What America wants from us now is to increase spending, by the way, beyond what either of the major parties is promising on defence, because it is worried about Taiwan being invaded now, like in this.
That's right, in the next 5 years.
And okay, we can increase that spending, but I'm not sure that you're going to see a huge explosion.
Well, not when the government, when the Albanese government wants to do a lot more on childcare and all sorts of other things as part of its agenda.
But you could go to 2.5% with another $14 billion. Now, next year we're going to spend $777 billion. Defence is not a priority for Albanese, so he told us to pay attention to Angus Houston, who did the Defence Strategic Review, Peter Dean, who wrote the Defence Strategic Review, Dennis Richardson, who just did an inquiry on submarines. All three of them, amidst hundreds of others, have said you must go to 3% to do the things you want to do right now. And he's saying that's all baloney. They don't know what they're talking
America
about.
Was 3.5.
Yeah, but if we went to 2.5, they'd be so thrilled with that. And you could do that with another 14 or $15 billion.
He's certainly open to more defence spending. He's not signalling, a big increase, and certainly is against these sort of targets now. But I wouldn't be surprised if some more defence spending comes out of all of this. Anyway, I feel like we could go for another hour with this conversation, but our panel, Katina, Curtis, Waleed, Ali and Greg Sheridan, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers, Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with cartoonist for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Melbourne Age, the one and only Cathy Wilcox. A very warm welcome.
Good morning, Mike.
Cathy, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is hoping that his meeting with President Trump won't go from AUKUS to awkward. This is a beautiful David Rowe cartoon with Captain Nemo, 20,000 Lies Under the Sea 2. Miles is looking out through the porthole saying that he grabs people by the AUKUS all the time, right?
Right. What was the name of that enormous octopus?
The Trump-topus.
The Trump-topus. Yeah, you wouldn't want 8 hands on that guy.
You've got a lovely little cartoon. He's holding the AUKUS submarine out of the reach of the baby Anthony Albanese.
Look, I might be jumping the gun here in suggesting that when Trump says he's reviewing the AUKUS deal, he actually means, I'm trying to see how I can screw some more money out of these guys. On second thoughts, maybe it's not the greatest deal ever.
Yeah.
So along comes Mr. Miles with a bag of money and a ladder to seal this deal.
This is Captain Albanese of the Silent Service looking through the periscope, and what's looking back? There! A lovely Warren cartoon.
It is very subtle, very nice.
He gets cars and military technology right. So does Mark Knight. Speaking of which, Mark Knight's invented a new class of submarine. We've gone from Virginia class to Trump class. We've made a small design tweak to try and win over the president. I did love this Matt Golding cartoon, The Stars and Strikes.
He's captured this beautifully. There was another one also this week where the Trump face was the fire.
I thought David Pope made a very good point here. Channel 9 reporter Lauren Tomasi was basically shot.
So here is Trump with his phone saying, we'll tell the Aussie PM he's not looking at it from the cops' perspective. And so here we have it from the cops' perspective.
Yeah,
that's
enemy
right.
of the people.
Excellent.
I think Megan Herbert here is making a cry for all of us, really, that
Yes.
a moment's peace would be nice as they're drawing the peace rainbow here. And
we've got Israel and Palestine. We've got Musk and Trump pulling down the we can learn from science and history. That could be RFK. That would be Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky coming in with his secret sneaky drone attack while Putin knocks down all the blocks.
This is the Conductor-in-Chief, live from LA, with the National Guard featuring the Stephen Miller Marine Band. I think David Rowe here is suggesting that maybe Stephen Miller is pulling the strings behind the scenes.
And the conductor's baton is a golf club, by the way, you know.
Well, he may not hold a hose, Cathy, but he certainly caused a few people to hold their nose when it was announced he was getting a King's Birthday honour.
Yeah, so I've got the Everyone Gets a Prize King's Birthday Honours, and as Jenna Price so beautifully put it in her column this week, it's bad enough that people just get an award for doing their job, but people getting an award for doing their job not that well.
Mark Knight here, I think, has hit the nail on the head. I didn't get this for just doing my job. I went above and beyond. He should get 5 for every ministry, shouldn't he?
Yes, that's right.
Here he is in Hawaii when the place was burning. Here he is playing his ukulele.
Kind of fun to go back and think of the days of ScoMo.
A lovely Golding cartoon. What did ScoMo do to deserve a medal for achievement for the highest degree for service to Australia or humanity?
He left politics.
That's gold standard.
It's Golding standard too.
Golding standard. Cathy, sadly, we lost one of the gentle giants of illustration and cartooning at the Sydney Morning Herald in the form of John Shakespeare, who lost his battle with cancer.
I know everybody has already sort of said it. A lovely person, but truly a lovely person who has been incredibly surprised even throughout this last 6 months, the extent of love and outpouring.
From across the political spectrum. You've had people as diverse as Barnaby and the Prime Minister. So he's going to be greatly missed, and our sympathies to his family.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much, Cathy. I'll let you do the honours.
Thanks, Mike. And it's back to you, David.
Thank you, Cathy. Thank you, Mike. Some final observations just quickly from me. Government, Greg, still pointing out they are doing more on armed drones, not just Ghost Bat. They just wanted to point that out after hearing your comments there.
Yeah, they've got Ghost Shark as well.
There you go.
And they've got millions of surveillance drones, but no drones that go bang in the night.
This conversation will continue. I just wanted to also point out it's been a tough week for many in the industry with the news that the project, your show, Waleed, and Q&A coming to an end. Having occasionally appeared on the project and occasionally hosted Q&A, disappointing to hear this news. And Greg, you wrote a wonderful lament for Q&A during the week as well. I think discussion programs about news and current affairs are always important. So thoughts with all of those involved.
Yeah.
Katina.
Just bringing it back domestically, we're going to get some more details about the Productivity Roundtable, I believe, from Jim Chalmers at the Press Club this week. My understanding is that, to give an idea of the scale of it, it's going to be hosted in the Cabinet Room. So that's more like 25 people than hundreds of people
Not the Great Hall.
Jobs and Skills Summit. And perhaps a good tip for those who might be thinking they'll attend, get your hands on Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's book Abundance, which the government's economics team is obsessed with at the moment.
Good tip. Waleed.
The meeting point of insiders and offsiders. The Club World Cup kicks off in the United States this week. Just keep an eye out for what could happen politically here, because we've seen troops on the streets in LA. That the administration has made clear that it will be searching people going into the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami to see whether or not they are illegal. We could see a scenario, and this is not far-fetched, where there are ICE officials arresting people in stands of a major FIFA tournament. This could be extraordinary. Hopefully none of that comes to pass, but it is real and it's in the air.
Yeah, very interesting. Greg.
Well, David, and I lament the loss of the project and Q&A, but I think if the government is looking for guidance in defence policy, it should look at the way the NRL Bulldogs are triumphing this year. The other teams have these big boppers, these magnificent platforms that are old and cumbersome and slow. The dogs swarm like a swarm of drones, lithe, sweet, efficient, speedy, and they are unstoppable. And to give you my deepest reflection, when you see the dogs in their majesty this year, you can feel God's pleasure. Who could not believe in God when you see the dogs?
If they come a cropper in the finals, do we have to change defence strategy? Is that what?
Well, we Catholics believe in purgatory.
Greg, I feel like you, like Waleed, could do offsiders as well as insiders. Thank you all very much for a terrific discussion this morning. Finally, Is it frozen elbow or frozen elbow? Either way, it was quite a temperature change from sub-zero Canberra to balmy Fiji for the Prime Minister on Friday. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Your High Commission said you got a frozen elbow. No, he's got the whole frozen elbow. You came from the freezer to be here.
Oh, it is so cold, Canberra.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.